What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Thursday, July 27th edition of the DraftKings MLB Sims video. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. And we only have 3 games tonight, unfortunately, but we're still going to take a look at the Sims tool. And as was the case yesterday, and even more so today, you are going to get more of a game theory angle typically when you simulate out slates like this, just because ownership is much higher. The raw ownership numbers are much more concentrated on the best plays on a slate. So you do get a better potential payoff by going against them, negatively correlating with the field than you do on your larger slates where even the most popular players aren't that popular relative to the entire field. So we will probably get into situations where there's not a lot to say in terms of like, this is why this is a good stack or this is why this is a good pitcher. It's more so it's good just because they're low owned and baseball is really volatile. That's not the most exciting thing to try and explain or teach, but it is true, and it is really important to understand overall in DFS. So you're going to see that showing up here. And as always, we're going to walk through the top lineups, top stacks, top players. As far as the lineups that I built 2,000 as usual. I only built 5-3 and 5-2 stacks. That's typically what I play. With it being a short slate, you certainly could get a little, play a little bit more. I also allowed for one hitter against my pitcher. That's typically what I go for on shorter slates with some exceptions, but that's what I did for this video. So now we can walk through the top lineups. And the first thing you're going to notice is you're getting a lot of 5-man Washington stacks. And this goes hand in hand with what I was just saying about having spots that don't look very good. I can't explain, like they're not likely to succeed. There's no amount of explanation or analysis I can do to make them sound like they're likely to succeed. But when they do succeed, they just come out on top at a high rate. And that's the case here because they're facing Kodai Senga in New York. Senga is projected for about 69% ownership on this slate. So it's very obvious right there that if the Nats happen to do well, you are knocking off like 70% of the field because they paid $9,000 for a pitcher who isn't pitching well if the Nats do well. And then on top of that, right now we also have the Nats projected for only about 7% aggregate ownership with a 13% chance of being the top scoring stack. So on top of the negative leverage that you're getting against Senga, you actually have an offense that by itself is projected to go a little bit under-owned as well. So even though they're not in a good spot, Senga's a good pitcher, highest strikeout percentage on the slate. It's just a spot where when things go the way you would like them to when you stack the Nats, it's very easy for you to just quickly find yourself at the tops of tournaments, as opposed to, if you stack the most likely team to succeed, yeah, they're going to succeed more often, but you're going to need a bunch of other things to happen in order for your lineups with that team to actually find their way to the top. You need a lot less to go your way once the Nats actually do well. So that's why you're seeing them show up at the top. It's not that Kodai Senga's bad. It's not that he's a bad play himself. It's not that the Nats are great. It's none of that. It's just that when Kodai Senga does poorly, it's very easy you have less competition at the top with your Nat stacks. So looking at how these lineups actually look, Dylan Cease, one of the better pitching options on the slate, taking on Cleveland. Josiah Gray, the Nats pitcher, not getting much ownership, so you're contrarian there as well. He has a tough matchup with the Mets, but he has done a better job limiting power this year than he has in the past. Then you're getting to your 5-man Nat stack with Ruiz, Meneses, Garcia, CJ Abrams, and Lane Thomas. So Kodai Senga has been good against both sides of the plate this year. He has been more susceptible to right-handed power. Sub 100 expected ISO to lefties with a higher strikeout percentage, 163 expected ISO to righties. So you're getting to the best power hitting righties in this Nats lineup with Meneses and Lane Thomas. And then you're getting cheap left-handed bats at relatively weak positions with Ruiz, CJ Abrams, Luis Garcia. You're getting high upside one-offs here. Jose Ramirez, the one-off at third base going against Cease. Again, perfectly fine with that, especially when you're talking Jose Ramirez on a slate of this size. And then a 2-man White Sox stack, also going up against one of the most popular, or the most popular pitcher on the, second most popular pitcher on the slate, Tanner Bybee. You're getting Jimenez, cheap power, and Benintendi, just a cheap hitter. Then we get a 5-3, Nats and White Sox, similar construction, Cease and Michaelis in this one. Another 5-3. Here we have a 5-3 Nats and Cubs. Scrolling down a little bit further, you get a 5-3 White Sox and Nats. So that one is Cease, Michaelis. Again, Michaelis relatively inexpensive, not getting a ton of ownership tonight against the Cubs. Really terrible pitching weather. It's supposed to be around 100 degrees in St. Louis, but all 3 games on this slate either have good hitting weather. That's the Mets game and the St. Louis game, or it's just in a very good hitter's park, as is the case with the White Sox. So you're getting to Yasmani Grandal, Andrew Vaughn. Yohan Moncada, Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez. You're getting plenty of power with this lineup. It's a tough spot against Bybee, but no pitcher on this slate is absolutely terrible. And the White Sox right now, again, projected to be under-owned. Second lowest top stack percentage, but still 13% chance of being the top stack, only about 10.5% ownership, and you're going up against a 50% owned pitcher. So once again, they're not going to succeed as often as other teams, but when they do, you're knocking off 50% of the field right there because they have Tanner Bybee. Next, we have Cleveland, again, facing a popular Cease. So we're seeing a theme where even though the Mets, and that's the one that really stands out, the Mets are the best stack on this slate, 24% chance of being the top stack, 26% ownership, 24% chance of being the top value. They're hands down the top stack, but they're facing a pitcher in Josiah Gray that's not getting any ownership. And on a slate of this size, it just becomes easier to get to the top of tournaments by eliminating 40 to 70% of the field, depending on which pitcher you stacked against. And that's why we're seeing these teams show up. The Cleveland stack is going with Bybee and Michaelis. You're getting Josh Naylor, Jimenez, Ramirez, Kwan, and Brennan. Plenty of upside there. And then you're getting to CJ Abrams and Lane Thomas against Senga. So you still have that Washington mini stack with a Wilson Contreras one-off against Justin Steele. So that's the big takeaway, I think, looking at these top stacks. Again, it's not that the Mets are bad by any stretch. They are the most likely stack to succeed, but they're not the lineups. They're not the stack that's giving you the best return, because when the Mets succeed, you haven't done much to eliminate other parts of the field. Like if they're 25% owned and they have an amazing game where you have to have the Mets, great. 75% of the field is eliminated because they don't have the Mets. But outside of that, you're just hoping that you land on the right random pieces to beat 25% of the field. When you get to the Nats, you get to the White Sox, you get to the Guardians, especially in the case of the Nats, you only have, if they do have that blow up game, you only have 6, 7, maybe 8% of the field that you're competing with. And then on top of that, it makes it difficult for other, like if they don't have that massive blow up game, they don't score 12 runs, they score 7, they score 8. You're not competing with stacks from these other teams as often because 70% of the field had Senga, who didn't pitch well. And so it doesn't matter if the Nats score 7 and the Mets score 7, if such a high percentage of the Mets stacks also have Senga. So that's why the Nats are so powerful. That's why teams like Cleveland and the White Sox are so powerful and showing up as well. Now we're going to select the top 150 lineups, look at the stack exposures first. Not surprising, Washington at the top, followed by St. Louis. They weren't showing up in those very top teams, but overall, 5-man St. Louis stacks are showing up well. They're going up against Justin Steele, so it is a tough spot, but it is great hitting weather, as I mentioned before. The Cardinals are getting 18% ownership, about a 15% chance of being the top stack. Next, we're getting to the Guardians, then the Cubs, then the White Sox, then the Mets. So again, Mets are the number one stack in terms of likelihood to succeed, value, all of that. It does make sense, though, and hopefully I explained it relatively well, why you could make the case that they are, or why they are showing up as the lowest 5-man stack. Looking at individual player exposures, Dylan Cease leading the way, 41% ownership, 41% projected ownership, nothing standing out there. We are getting over the field on Steele. That's pretty interesting since we were getting to the Cardinals as well, but it does make some sense because he's just getting like half the ownership of Dylan Cease. He's getting like a third of the ownership of Kodai Senga. He's not as good a strikeout pitcher as those guys, but he is still a very good pitcher, and he still certainly can beat either or both of those guys on any given slate. Then you get Bybee a little bit below the field here. Then you start getting into the Nats, Lane Thomas, Jeimer Candelario, your two highest owned hitters, followed by Ruiz and Abrams. As far as Nats bats go, Luis Robert individually is in there. So is Jose Ramirez, two of the best hitters on the slate. Clearly nothing wrong with that. Josiah Gray, really interesting as well. 33% ownership, 8% projected ownership, or 33% exposure, I should say. This is a spot, and I say it a lot, this comes up on like every Sims video. If I were to get a lot less than 33% Josiah Gray today, that would be perfectly fine. I think it's not like he's not a great pitching play. He projects as the worst pitcher or second worst pitcher, depending how you have him compared to Michaelis. He has a tough matchup against the Mets, but it's sort of the inverse also of getting to the Nats bats, getting to bats against Cease and Bybee. If the very popular Mets do fail today, you have a $6,600, I believe, somewhere in that price range, pitcher in Josiah Gray who is not getting ownership and almost by definition outperformed his salary. So it does make sense just, again, from a game theory standpoint, which plays a much bigger role on these small slates. So I think that's the big takeaway today. It looks like a slate where you're going to be doing, or should be doing, I will be doing a lot of contrarian stuff, and it's relatively low probability, but also pays well when it works out. So it's risky. It's not going to feel great, but that's the way this slate is looking. Thanks for checking out the video. As always, the link is below if you want to use this tool for yourself. It will make you better at DFS. And good luck on your lineups tonight.